the trick to getting the particles to look like blobs of particles rather than individual spheres in this case, if I draw a render region, has to do with the shading. Now what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to increase the light a little bit, because again, lighting really helps us control the look of any sort of particle effect, whether it be volume or surface shaded like we're going to do. We're not actually going to use the volumetric shaders here, as they'd be overkill. So I'm going to actually delete the default light, and I'm going to bring in my own lights to start this from scratch. So I'll bring in an infinite light. If I use the user view to help me out, I want the light to be shining in the main direction my camera is at. So I can actually just use a shaded mode here and use this to help me control the camera direction. I'll use local mode and just make sure that the kind of sun is coming from above. And I'll bring in a directional light on the other side, just to shade the off side. And I'll press enter, and I'll just make the intensity of that light as well as the light color a little bit different. Give this a bit of a warmish color here, because we are dealing with a fairly red, warm environment color tone. So this is kind of like after the rainfall. So if I just draw a render region now, I should have a much better lighting scenario. Okay, that's not looking bad except for the fong on the branches. I'll just select the branches, jump into the materials for it there, and I'll take down the specularity as well as the luminance on the specularity. Okay, you can just take that color down as well. I'll just add a touch of brown to the branches. I'll bring that down for the specularity color as well. Okay, so I've got my colors in check. Again, I'm just going to increase the color on my infinite light a little bit more. Let's go with 0.95. Perfect. And I could always enable a little bit of shadow and lower the umbra as well. So when it comes to the particles themselves, we want to actually render them off as blobs. Now blobs are actually really easy to achieve in ice. If you select the particle cloud through the Explorer and you open the ice tree, the emit from surface shape allows us to define our particles as blobs. Unfortunately, the shape alone does not allow us to render blobs. If we switch the shape to the blob type, the particles still render as individual spheres. If I actually just roll back from the beginning, I'll just wait till I get a bunch of them accumulated here. I'll draw a render region. You can see the attempt at the blobs, but there's no real smooth blending at this point. So to finish this effect off, we're going to move into the blobs folder in the particle tasks and bring the blobs compound into the graph. And we want to plug that into our ice tree. I'll plug it in right after the emit compound is plugged in. So we get that. And you can see right away the particles are rendered as a volume rather than as individual particles. So if I want to refine the look of the actual drops, I could lower the size of the particles and of course increase the size of the slide-on surface, as I would be having more particles combined to make an effect. So what I'm actually going to do is try and get smaller clumps of particles, so I'll actually have much more granular control here, because the shape is a little bit not raindrop enough. It looks a little bit too blobby. If I increase the size, it doesn't work so badly actually. We could try something like that, but the raindrops here are quite large. So I'm going to actually try and take the size down. So let's say we're dealing with a size of 0.07 for the particle size. So if we keep that in mind, and our slide-on surface, if we want to take into account, well, since we'll have smaller particles, let's take into account a slightly higher minimum number of neighboring particles before we create a state where the particles drip. And if we use our size of 7 times 0.07, we get a cutoff distance of 0.49. So that should work now with our smaller particle size. There we go. Okay, so we're getting some cool little drops now. Let's actually have a look and see how they work as a blob. So that's actually working much better. The next part just involves shading the particles.